Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to another indie horror author interview with friend of the channel, friend in real life, Joshua Pangborn. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I am doing good. Very excited. We had you for a filmmaker interview. We've done your influential. You were here for our Queer Live, and now we're doing the other thing that you do, which is writing for your new upcoming collection, which is super exciting.
I have to find out some other reason to come back on the show. I'm ready to get a reason.
Who needs a reason? You just tell us when you want to be here. We'll make it happen.
There we go. I'll just stop on by. I'll bring a drink.
It's like a couch or something. I don't know, like a fun I don't know. I don't want to say basement because I don't know, we're horror fans. I guess it's not really that weird to say basement to us, but I was gonna be like, it's like a hangout basement. Then I was like, oh.
It's like a cool attic.
A cool attic, I'll take it. Cool attic sounds good. Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to say thank you for sending this ahead of time and letting me read it. I know I also had, am I allowed to say why I had it early?
You can, because this is probably going to hopefully people will. Yes, you can. Yes.
I was gonna just say it, and then I was like, oh wait, let me make sure. Yeah, so I got an early copy of this because you asked me to blurb it, which is so meaningful, and I genuinely couldn't say yes fast enough. I was like, oh my god, of course. And so I read this weeks ago now, but I was going through and rereading some stuff today just to kind of touch up for the conversation, and I have zero doubts that this is going to be well received. I think people are going to really love what you have to say with this collection, and I'm really proud of you.
I'm really, really excited for people to read it.
Yeah.
I have done a lot of movies and television at this point, but this is something different. It's different to it's basically just me. Because with the movies and television, you've got other actors, you've got other people involved.
Sure.
If somebody doesn't like it, you can blame someone else. But no, this one is right. Me. So if you don't like it, it's just me. But no, I'm really, really excited for people to see this. I've wanted to do a book for a very, very, very long time, but I've never really sat down and said, let's actually do it. And I worked with Defear Jackson on one of my projects, The Brooklyn Butcher, and he invited me. Actually, I guess I'll rewind. I met Defear Jackson because he invited me to contribute in his book, Theater Well Fat, which was a collection of essays and interviews with actors and performers who are fat and who have experiences in the world of theater.
Oh, cool.
So he asked me to be part of that, and I did, and I was very honored to be a part of that because, as you know, and as frequent listeners of the show might know, fat positivity is one of the areas that I tend to focus on a great deal in my work. And so with Defear, I worked with him a little bit on that, and then he auditioned for The Brooklyn Butcher, one of my feature films, and I cast him in that. And after that, he was like, you know what, you really should write a book, put together a collection of your short stories or something. Yeah. And he's like, I'll edit it. I'll be the editor for it. And immediately, once he said that, I was like, oh my goodness, that takes away all the stuff that I don't want to do. So yes, absolutely. But seriously, it's so hard. I mean, you know better than a lot of people. And I learned from watching him. I mean, the process of putting it together is so much work, and so I didn't have the time or the energy to teach myself that, and he wanted to take that on, and I was like, okay, if you want to do that, then I am so grateful and so excited, and let's make this happen. And I was able to put together my stories, and I was able to just focus on the writing of the stories, which was really, really nice.
Versus all the other pieces,
which is so rare because usually when I'm doing a project, I'm involved in every aspect of it. And Defear is very good at keeping me involved in everything, but I didn't have to do the nitty gritty work and all that. So,
and I love that you did finally, take that leap and because your short stories are how I got introduced to you. You were in Queer Saints Volume 1. with your story Crumbs, which is how I even became to know who you were. That's how I started to follow you. And then of course you ended up submitting a story to That Old House, the Bathroom. And it's been, and that's kind of what stirred our friendship and our working relationship. And it's been, I was like, really, I'm really excited. I know you talked about it a while ago about doing a collection, and then, as the ideas, as it kind of, I guess, is now coming into fruition, though, it's really cool to see. So I'm gonna throw up the cover and introduce it, which is Homo Phobias.
Yes.
But Joshua R. Pangborn.
It is a collection of queer, fat-positive horror stories. So, if either of those buzzwords ring a bell, then you should pick this up and read it, because I think it's a lot of fun.
There's a lot, so much going on in this, though. It's like, and I think it's one of my favorite things about when really unique authors do collections, because then you really get to see just all the places their brains go. And this has so many different stories, like types of stories and things, and unique twists and bends. And yeah, it's got, I think this is going to check so many boxes for people.
I hope so. I was conscious about doing a variety of genres and tones in it. I wanted to make sure that there was a little something for everybody in it, different kinds of stories, to give people something to find that they can hopefully connect with and enjoy.
Yeah. And for anybody worried, we're not going to like dive into such specifics as to give any plot points away or anything like that. No spoilers. But when we get to a little bit later in our conversation, there is a specific story I want to talk about, at least as much as we can, without giving too much away. Cause that one
I'm very excited.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I guess we'll kind of start with the basics before we jump into some more like the, story specific things. But you kind of already gave the background about what, what kind of pushed you in the direction to finally do this. I kind of just want to talk about like the title and the cover for a minute, and kind of where those came from, and what kind of, where that vision came from.
Sure. Well, Homo Phobias came out because I couldn't call it Scream Queen, and I couldn't call it Queer for Fear because those were already taken.
Oh no!
I really wanted a title that would tell people A, that it's horror, and B, that it is really gay and really queer.
Yeah.
And I wanted that to be clear from the title. And that's why Scream Queen was the first thing that popped in my head. But then Ryan Murphy had to go and take that. Ryan Murphy, how dare you? You have everything.
The nerve.
The nerve, Ryan Murphy. No, which, by the way, side note, if you haven't watched Scream Queen, you really should, because it's a really funny and wonderful pair of seasons. I wish we had one more at least, but that's another story.
Yeah.
I wanted people to pick this up and go, okay, this is a queer book and it's about horror. So there we go. I also really wanted them to know that it was fat positive or fat focused characters. And the way that I didn't want to put that in the title, but I wanted to make that on the cover. So that's sort of where the cover comes from. A lot of the story, there's a lot of erotic horror in this. There's a lot of eroticism, and I wanted to make sure that, again, people were aware of that, and I wanted to have people see something that was maybe a little erotic, but maybe also a little bit scary, and a little bit confusing, and a little bit hopefully engaging. I mean, I'm really excited by this cover. Dafir and I talked about a couple ideas. We ended up settling and agreeing on this one. I forget which one of us finally came up with this idea, but I took the photo, and then I gave it to Dafir, and Dafir photoshopped it up to this and made this really awesome little cover with these hands. Those are I could have, and I wanted to, but I didn't have the time for to do makeup on all the hands, so that way they looked like demon hands. So Dafir did it for me in Photoshop.
So the hands, are the hands real though, or they were added?
Hands are all real people's hands.
Okay.
They were all real other actors. Basically, we were filming something else that day, and I thought,
got it. Perfect.
cover. Who wants to strip naked and touch my body?
And
And voila, that's that.
you were able to come up with 2 sets of hands.
Yeah, actually, there's 3 sets of hands there. So
Okay, 3 sets. Okay.
it's just wow, some of them were the way that we had to position to
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Dafir also had to cut out all the rest of the bodies and everything.
I
So
mean,
I'm really happy with the cover. I think it's really, I mean, it really reflects what I think the stories are about and
yeah.
cover a lot of. So
Yeah. No, and I think the work on the editing part of it looks really great too. The coloration is really eye-catching and wicked looking. The contrast of the skin tones is perfect. Like it's very just it just looks really, really good. Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. And I think I like that you made the point of saying like, "Oh, I did it this way because I wanted people to know what they were reading," because there are times when that's not always the case. And so for me, like stuff being super gay doesn't matter. But there are other things that like I don't particularly want to read, but the cover can be misleading or that's which is usually why trigger warnings and things of that nature come into play. But I do think that this paints a very clear picture of what you're getting yourself into, but in a very enticing way. I mean, it's a very exciting cover, I think.
thank you. No, I that's what I wanted. I wanted something to be like somebody to see it and be like, you know what? I really don't want to read that, or I really do want to read that.
What are the other?
One or the other. I don't like doing things in the middle.
Yes.
So I want you to have a strong reaction. It's either a good or a bad one, but a strong reaction either way. So
Yeah. No, I think it no, I think it's great. Really, I do.
and it's
I
nice because the fog and everything in the cover.
yeah.
When Dafir added that, it's really reminiscent of Demon Doctor, one of my main series that I make on my
Oh
YouTube
yeah,
channel.
on you. Yep.
Because Demon Doctor, the fog and everything is a big part of the logo for Demon Doctor and all. So it was nice. It's a nice touches to the other elements of the Crooniverse, as we call it. But
Yeah. I love that too because when the people who work with you like comment on videos or comment on posts, they always reference that the what how do you say it?
Crooniverse.
Crooniverse. They always reference that and it's like it's very specific and I love that it's like this little community within a community. It's very cute.
We're very lucky to have such passionate people
Oh,
both behind the camera and in front of it. So
yeah. Um So I have some obviously stuff I wanted to jump into. But before we do that, if you don't mind, I wanted to read the dedication really quick because I think that gives away to a lot of, the meaning behind these stories and why you write the things you do. But so the dedication reads to all the fat queer people like me who love to be a little scared and to all the people who love us. Um, which is like you said before, I mean, anybody who's read anything that you've written, who's seen anything that you've worked on or talked about things you've worked on, or has talked to you for any length of time knows that there are 3 very prominent themes, and that's going to be sex positivity, fat positivity, and queer everything, And so I think but I love this because, you and I have had private conversations as far as
mhm.
like about self-image and being self-conscious and loving your body the way that it is and all of these things on my side specifically because I struggle. That's something I struggle with. But this is such a strong message. And the way that you write these stories about these characters, you use it in such a manner that it's not what is the word? What am I trying to say? It's very like it's just the story. Like when I read a story where every character is described as this thin, blah 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 blah, and then it's been like that the whole book, but then you get to a part where they describe someone who's not, it comes out very just rough and
Mhm.
weird and it doesn't make sense. And but this is like this is what people look like, this is how people are like, and it's just this very natural feeling to talking about that and having that there. And I kind of wanted to jumpstart the conversation by just talking about how you're able to do that. If you even know, right? Like that may just be something that's supernatural to you. I'm not sure, but it just comes, it feels like it comes very easy in a world where it's not always easy to love your body, let alone, you know what I'm trying to say.
No, I absolutely know what you're trying to say. It's not easy.
No?
I don't think it's easy for anybody because
Sure. Yeah.
we're all told that we're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And there's always I wish I could say that every day I look in the mirror and I say I am beautiful. But
Yeah.
I don't, not every day. But I always try to put that aside, and I always try to um, when I'm making a world, when I'm writing a world, I always try to find a way to um, make a world that I want to live in,
Yeah.
regardless of whether or not it's a creepy,
I
scary. Uh, but I mean, I want a world where where
Yeah.
so many of my stories are really not about being queer and coming out, and or all my
Yeah,
stories,
no, they're not.
they're not about losing weight or trying to fit in because, oh my goodness, I'm fat. I mean, there's a need for those stories and there's a validity for those stories, but that's for the longest time those are the only stories that existed for queer people or fat people. It's either I have
Mhm.
HIV or I'm coming out and my parents don't accept me,
Yep.
or fat and nobody will love me, or I'm fat but people still love me anyway, or that and it's like it needs to be a world
Yeah.
where lots of people are queer and lots of people are fat, because that's the world that I live in. I mean,
Yeah.
I, I mean, I think for a lot of queer people, well, like if you watch a lot of movies that have queer representation or fat
Mm.
representation, it's one character, and
Yes.
it's maybe two characters, but not really. It's almost always just one character, and
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
you've got the fat character, you've got the queer character, and then they both die very quickly in the movie. um,
Mhm.
Sometimes the queer character lasts longer, but the fat character almost always dies at the very beginning.
Mhm.
And it's just not the world that I live in because most of my friends are queer, and most of the queer people I know mostly hang out with queer people, and so
Yeah.
it's rare for a queer person to be the token queer person.
That's
Um,
not reality. Yeah.
once they're adults, if I were writing about high schoolers, maybe that's different. But I also don't tend to write about high schoolers anymore.
No,
Uh,
adults, all like very, which I love that too, by the way, because these stories are relatable. I can watch stuff about teenagers, I can read stuff about teenagers, but I don't connect to any of that the same way that I
yeah,
do characters that look like me, are like me, and are the same age as me.
I'm very selfish in that I write characters and stories in which I could be an actor in them. So
Oh,
that's what I
well, that's
want.
good to know. Picture in my head while I'm like,
Well, if you're reading this, most every story in here has a character that I would be playing. So
okay.
so just FYI, everyone. But no, I think to go back to your question about how I do it. I just think about. I've gotten to the point in my writing where
Mhm.
I do not write a character who's not queer or fat,
Mhm.
unless there's a specific reason for it.
Okay.
In my head, that's just who they are. Everyone
Yeah.
I'm writing is that. I
Yeah.
very early on when I started writing Skeleton Crew, which is the first web series that I ever made, um, I was told that I needed to have more straight representation, because we needed some straight people in it, and I succumbed to that, because I listened to the voices outside of me, and now thinking back on it, I think it's ridiculous. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness,
Sure.
poor
Yeah.
straight people. There's not enough representation for them.
I
Oh my,
know they don't have any spotlight.
there's no stories about straight people. When will they think of the straight people? But that's the first and sort of the last time that I let somebody tell me I need to
Yeah.
do something that was against my instincts, and
Okay.
uh, that sort of sits in the back of my head, and I'm always going, why? What does it matter? I don't need to do that. I need to tell the stories that Josh wants to tell, and the characters that Josh wants to write, and the characters Josh wants to write are all fat and queer. So that's
That's
that's sort
good.
of it. I mean, that's sort of what it is. So it does get harder in writing, though. I noticed as I was writing these stories to not
Oh,
make
okay.
every character sound like they look exactly the same, because
Oh, I can, yeah, I guess I
there's
can see
only
that.
so many
Yeah.
words to say talking about somebody being fat, and it's like, but you still want to paint a picture of what they look like because not every
Yeah.
fat person looks the same, just like not every
No.
thin person looks the same, and not every muscular person looks the same.
Yep.
So that was an interesting challenge where I'm like, oh, I need to change these adjectives a little bit. I need to change things up a little bit. So that was an interesting challenge. I do feel.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like well, for what it's worth, I think it's very well balanced. I never felt like I felt like when I was picturing characters, I was able to picture them differently. I didn't really struggle with that. And that's
Good.
just kind of my thoughts as a reader, right? Of just being able to kind of make each, but also like I think a lot of people are probably like this, and you're probably like this too, but like whenever I am picturing a character in a book, a lot of times it's not even the way they're described, it's how they act that kind
Yeah.
of like shapes how they look. Like if somebody's a jerk, there's like a very specific, like, you know what I'm saying? So, but anyway,
Mhm.
I think you balanced that really, really well though. I didn't feel like anything was repetitive, or I didn't have a hard time picturing people or anything.
I'm glad to hear that. That's that
Yeah.
because that was something that I was consciously worried about. I'm like, "Oh, I don't want everyone to think that they're the exact same character in every story.
It's just a bunch of the same people in all the same stories. Yeah, I get
It's just
that.
repetitive. It's just the same Josh in every story.
So when you're going through this, it's divided into parts. It's got three parts: madness, mothers, and magic. And which would be like such a, like that would be like perfect for like a subtitle, because I was like, oh, that sounds like something from like a movie poster or something, where it's like, you know, but
If I do another volume of Homo Phobias, then this will be retitled Homo Phobias, Mothers, Madness, Mothers, and Magic, and then the next one will be
it's so like, it just like when you say them together, you know what I mean? It just like flows.
You're right. I
So
didn't even think about that. That sounds really good,
I
though.
said it out. I was typing it out, which is reading over notes and like typing stuff. And I was like, oh, like this reads like its own like thing. Um, but I guess I kind of wanted to talk through those breakdowns and why those breakdowns as far as separating the stories. Now, I think the one that speaks for itself the most is probably the mothers section.
Mhm.
Those chapters under that part two, but just kind of where that came from, this idea of splitting it into three sections like that.
Sure. Well, it's Dafir and I went back and forth on how many stories I was going to include.
Okay.
I was really self-conscious about making a collection of with only under like 15 stories, because
Sure.
I was like, oh, if I'm gonna make people buy my book, I need to make sure that there's a lot of stories in there. And Dafir was like, well, no, you don't need to do that, because he's like, because he held up like an Edgar Allan Poe story. He's like, I bought this 60-page Edgar Allan Poe story, and it's just Hound of the Baskervilles, and that's not Edgar Allan Poe, but whoever it was something like that.
I know I get I get your point though, right? Yeah, I
Yeah,
totally understand.
like people do that. People just buy 60-page stories, and I'm like, I know. I guess because I'm really bad at asking people to pay for my work. I'm really, really, really bad at that, because I guess it's the inner saboteur, as RuPaul would say, in my head. Um,
Yeah,
saying that your work is not worth any money. Why would people pay for it?
I get that. Yeah.
And so in my head, I'm like, I need to give them everything. And Dafir's like, we don't need 15 stories. I'm like, it needs to be 300 pages. It needs to be 15 stories or more. And he's like, no, you need to write what you feel is a good amount of stories for the collection.
Yeah.
Without and so, long story short, we settled on what we settled on, which
Mhm.
was 9 stories in the end for the collection. And
Yeah.
when that happened, he started to look at how we could sort of structure it. And
Okay.
he said, "Well, we've got 3 stories, 3 stories, and 3 stories," and that made sense, doing a triptych kind of thing like that.
Sure.
And he's the one that came up with the 3 divisions for them.
Oh,
Uh,
nice. Okay.
he knows my preference for alliteration, so he did the Mother's Madness and Magic, and that's sort of what we came up with. I guess I think at one point we were trying to do monster instead of one of them,
Oh,
but we settled on magic, I think, because of how the stories ended up working out. So
yeah, no, I think magic works for the last ones for sure.
yeah.
It's it was just really cool because like it's almost like a warning, you know, like
Mhm.
you get to the word madness and you're like, but then for me personally, I got to the mothers and I was like, oh, what am I walking into? And then you get, but oddly enough, for this kind, I guess like the final act of the collection, when you get to the magic, it's almost uplifting, except that I know you're writing. So I was like, I'm not going to fall for this, but it's just a very like magic. Like you go from like madness, like foreboding to maybe it gets better for somebody, which was fun.
And possibly the magic are the darkest ones, but yeah, I think. I mean, they're all pretty dark stories.
They are.
But
yes.
This is not necessary. I tend to always have a little bit of humor, I think, in what I write. So I think there's some humor in every one of these stories. But
yeah,
people who are used to my more horror comedy aspects, I don't think that's really here as much or as prevalent in this. I think these are darker stories in general. So
they are. No, I would agree with that. I think that there is and again, when I'm talking, I'm thinking of like one story in specific that just really but there were a bunch of them where I was just like, which is actually a good segue into something else I wanted to ask about, because all of them, most of them, if not all of them, have this very unique change at the end of the story. We get this very sudden, going in a different direction, which I don't think I'm very good at. And I always have like mad respect for people who can put that in their stories and it just works. And you're like surprised, because it's not as fun to get to those parts of things when they're predictable, which I did not think was an issue with this collection at all. But I just kind of wanted to know, like, is that concept of doing that twist like that at the end, is that something that's just something that you're a fan of? Like, where does that kind of inspiration to do that come from?
I think it's just sort of me with my writing. I think. I mean, obviously, other people do this, not just me. But
no, I know it. I know.
I just think that's a Pangbornian trait, I guess. No.
TM.
Yes, trademark me. So no. But I do think that's sort of just how I write. I tend to like to write an ending that hopefully you can't see coming too much.
Yeah.
And how oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, I know the ending of the story before I know the rest of it. And so
I'm like that too. Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, how can I get to that story, that ending, in a way that's unexpected? And
yeah.
So sometimes it's very easy, and sometimes it's
yeah,
not so much.
I can see that.
Yeah. But ultimately, I think it's how I choose, how I like to tell stories, because I think I'm not necessarily big on the who. I'm not a good whodunit person. I think I'm not a good mystery person. I love whodunits and I love mysteries, but I don't think I'm necessarily good at creating them 100%. But I think I am good at creating a WTF sort of experience. And that's sort of what I want. I mean, I love, for love him or hate him, I love M. Night Shyamalan's movies where he's very
same.
successful at it. So when he's successful, he's very successful, and those are pretty awesome. So I guess I guess that's sort of, maybe I just grew up with those kinds of stories being the ones I liked the most, and that's sort of what where it came from. So
yeah, no, I think it works really well, because I think what you do, at least for me as a reader, that makes those twist endings really catch me off guard is you end up as you're reading, you end up focusing on, I think, like, I wouldn't call it a misdirection, because I don't think that's necessarily what I mean, but you get caught up in these other details that you find yourself wrapped up in what is in front of you and not what could be. And I think, like, out of all of these stories, there was only one that I didn't trust, but I still got it wrong. Like, and I'll tell you that one like off camera. But there was one story in particular where I was like, something's up here, and I knew something was up, but what I was so confident it was not, and then it went in a completely different direction. And I think that it's because when you're reading these stories, specifically in Homo Phobias, is you're getting caught up in the characters, the conversations, because a lot of dialogue, a lot of back and forth between the characters that we're seeing on the pages. And that's a distraction from thinking, well, what could happen at the end? You're not even there because you're so engulfed in the moment, which I think is something that you do very, very well in all of these stories, because none of them, like I said, none of the twists are given away. I don't think any of them were predictable at all. And I don't think that that's an easy thing to do. I just don't.
Thank you. I do like to think if you go back and reread them, there are clues there
Clues.
for a
I
lot of
agree
them.
with that.
But I
Yep.
think the clues that you realize after the fact.
It's too late. Yeah. You've already been bamboozled. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got you sucked in and you can't get
That's
out.
yeah, because there's like 2 or 3 stories I reread after I read them once, one you already know, and then there were 2 others. And I was like, see, if I had paid attention to this specific couple things, I might would have picked up on, but I'm glad that I didn't. I think it works better, as just a once read through, and then you get to be surprised at the end, and then you get to do it 8 more times after that, right? It's because there's 9 stories, so it's really fun, and I love that you did that. It's just, I guess, I just don't think it's a super easy thing to do. So I was like, ooh,
Thank you. No, that's really, really awesome to hear that sort of
yeah,
worked for you. Because
no,
it's also people love to be like, I got the ending before everyone else, and it's like,
oh, they do, don't they?
sometimes just enjoy it also, and just enjoy the ride. And also, did you really? Because there are some people who when they on Twitter, they're always like, well, this ending was so predictable. I'm like, was it?
No,
I
it
don't
wasn't. This
really
like No, there's so many where people say that. But also I think too, it's like there are movies that I figure out because we've seen so many of them, right? We start to
yeah.
pick apart the formula. But I think it's also fine and honestly better for the people who didn't, because they got to have a completely different experience than you did. And it's like it's a better experience to not know what's going to happen, or to
It
not
is.
be able to figure it out. Like it's not,
People,
so it's not really bragging rights that you just got
yeah.
robbed of an experience and you're like bragging about it on the internet. But reality is the people who didn't get it are the winners because they got to have a fun experience.
I have a friend who loves to read the Wikipedia articles about movies before he sees them, so that way he knows everything. And I'm like, why would you ever
Oh
want to
my
not go into a
gosh.
movie and enjoy the experience of not knowing what's happening? It's I just
Oh, that's
he's
crazy.
like, I don't mind spoilers at all, and I'm like, how can you not want to just be caught like completely off guard by something? Like that's
I
that's
live for
the
that.
fun of it.
Yeah.
Especially for people like you and me who consume a lot of media and make
Yes.
media.
Yes.
It's
No, I
it,
totally agree.
when something catches you and just takes the
Yeah.
rug out from under you, that is the best. And it's
It is
just
the best, and it's because it doesn't happen as often as it once did. We become desensitized, or like I said, we pick apart that formula and we go, "Oh, you know what? Figured it out." And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it doesn't bother me when that happens, but then other times I find myself like, "Why did you just keep looking, Angel? You should have just sat still and enjoyed the movie, and now you already know the ending and it's no fun now." Like, so
yeah.
when something does get you like that, especially exactly like you said, being the types of people in our community that we are, and what we consume and put out. And it's like it lingers, and I love that feeling of like reading, because I told you, and I know eventually I'm going to name the story, I promise we'll get there, but there's a story in this that sat with me for so long after I read it. And it's when I try to think about, and I'm not obviously going to I'm not going to talk about anything story or plot point wise to give anything away, but it was one of those things where I was like, I'm not even really sure why. Like on some level I do know, which is probably the perfect segue to talking about some of the themes that are in these stories. But if I had to say like, oh, it was this exact thing, like there were multiple things in this particular story that upset me and got to me. But overall, I don't know exactly what it was that just like bothered me so much about it. And of course, we're talking about horror, so I mean that all complimentary. I mean that all with compliments. That's not
Of course, yeah. No.
that's it's a positive, positive, positive. But there's a lot of different themes in all of these stories, in addition to the ones we've already talked about. And so, of course, the story I'm talking about is Empty Nest, which, for anybody curious, that is my favorite from the collection. I loved all of them. I don't think there's a dud in the bunch, but that one, for some reason, that one just got into my skin and would not let go. And it's mostly because of the ending, which again, I'm not going to say anything about, but there's a lot of these themes, and obviously you've got the part 2 called Mothers. So obviously in that one there's that's all about like mothers and like their relationships with their queer children and these things. And so, but there's other themes in this as well. And I guess it's not really more of a question, just a talking point about, I just wanted to kind of talk about those and what they were.
Well, I guess let me ask you what themes you got out of the stories. I'll be curious to see what you got out of them versus what my intentions were. That's
yeah. So
put you on the spot now.
For sure. Yeah. So some of the big ones for me, and I think again, this kind of just goes back to personal experiences, but I got a lot of like trauma related things from not just from the mother's stories, but also from relationships. So there's a weird mix of there's even some grief stuff I would say in here. There's but the trauma things I think were the ones that sang to me the most, because I've had a long history of not so super healthy relationships, and my biological mother is not fun. And so the stories about those things were kind of the ones that I think sang to me the most, because, and it's probably why Empty Nest is so you know, it resonated with me so deeply, because, and we've talked about this before. I think we talked about this when we did the Queer Live. But you know, I didn't grow up in a very warm home in regards to sexuality or I mean even ethnicity or gender identity or anything. Like I grew up in a very closed-minded house, and so a lot of times when I would be in relationships with people I didn't think I knew my parents would be upset about, I would just not have a relationship with my family, which was not super fun either, right? Because you want to be able to share those things in a positive way with the people that are supposed to love you unconditionally. And so those types of stories, I think, and those types of relationships just they resonated pretty deeply with me. The other one, I'm blanking on the name. It's the other one under the story about not ever falling in love.
Oh, The Gift.
The Gift. Thank you. I couldn't remember the name. All I could see for some reason was the word crumbs, and I knew that was not the story I was talking about. I was like, what is the name of it? The Gift. So that one was another one where it kind of, you know, it's obviously not the same story. It's a very different story, but just these connections, I think, to family in general were just very they just resonated very deeply with me. So those are the ones that I think I picked up on the most.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, one of the things that I set out to write, to have a sort of unifying themes for the collection, which is hard because you have a whole book collection of stories. You're like, well, they have to have some relationship of some kind. I mean, they can't they can't be fat and queer. They have to have something else.
Sure.
No, the dark side of love and the challenges of love, be that friendship or family or romantic love,
Different loves. Yep.
all different types of love, and the 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 quest for it, and the failure to achieve it. These are all themes I think in it that are in it for sure.
Yeah.
I I I mean, anything I write is always a little bit about identity and figure out who you are.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
and But yeah, I think that's pretty much what my goal was with the themes, was to do something on trauma and love and family and relationships, and that clearly worked, because that's what you pulled out of it as well. So
No, it did. And I actually did have that in my notes. I put specifically longing for love is the note that I put. But yeah, but yeah, I think all of that comes through really, really well. Um I've talked about, I say this all the time, but like the type of things that work for me in the horror genre, whether it's in a book or a film or or a short or whichever, is usually when it works the best for me when there's an emotional something. I can watch funny horror, I can watch dumb horror, I can read, you know, whatever. But in order for it to really linger and be meaningful for me as an experience, I have to have some kind of emotional response. And and that was definitely achieved through this, because I think regardless of your journey, whether you're queer or straight or whatever, like it doesn't matter. That type of those feelings regarding love in all across the spectrum of what that means is something super relatable. And even in people who haven't experienced, really bad situation with their family. Some people who grew up in perfectly happy, healthy homes aren't paying a bunch of money for therapy right now. Those, like, they can still relate to the other aspects of that feeling, of what that feels like to want that, and to feel like sometimes you question whether you deserve it or not. Like, some of that came through a little bit too, I think, of this moment of like, should I even get to have this thing, this unachievable thing? And I think all of that came out for me too.
And I think that's one of the things I really try to do when I write stories or movies or film,
Mhm.
is to write something that anyone can connect to regardless of their identity.
Yeah,
Um,
for
I
sure.
really and that's why I don't really try to write stories that are about the dark sides of being queer.
Sure.
When I say that, I specifically mean the HIV and coming out to negative
Yeah,
feedback.
those two specific. Yeah, yeah,
Those,
yeah.
I don't really write those because that's something that's very, very unique to the queer experience. But
Yes,
but just because the characters in my story are queer doesn't mean that the experiences and the feelings that they're having are not relatable to straight people
for sure.
or somebody who's questioning their identity and everything. And that's sort of one of the goals that I have when it comes to writing these stories is yes, it's about a man who's seeking love for another man, but
Mhm.
the feelings he's having are the same as a man who might be seeking love with a woman. So it's it's the goal. And again,
Yeah.
this is not to disparage any stories about HIV or coming
No,
out.
I know, I
Stories
get
are
what you're
so
saying though.
important
Kind of,
as well.
yeah.
It's just not the stories that I want to tell. So
No, I get that. Yeah. I think it's no, I think all of that comes through really, really well. I loved well, and like you mentioned earlier, there is a lot of erotic elements to these stories that are in here,
mm,
but there's this really unique balance too of discussing the feelings of love while not making the two things mutually exclusive too.
mhm,
There's some casual conversations in there about or conversations, I said it backwards, conversations of casual relationships and kind of what
mm,
that looks like, or why, whether it's from the perspective that like that's just the want and need for the moment, or it's to avoid something else, or whatever the reason may be, which I think is really good too. And that really hones in more on the sex positive side of things too, because
yeah.
those are things that, you're in all kinds of communities, a queer community, as I mean, if you're even as, a straight woman, like you can't, you're not allowed to have those experiences or talk about those things, or you're this or that. And so I liked that those kind of notes were in there as well, of just that these are perfectly normal things to experience and talk about. You know what I mean? And I really liked that too.
It's so important to me to put that in into anything I make really because
Yeah.
as a culture, I mean, I know I grew up thinking sex was something dirty and sex was
Yeah.
something bad and sex was
Yeah.
something you shouldn't talk about with people. And I think that's so silly.
Yeah.
It's taken me a long time to get there because the media also
Yeah.
treated it that way. The media treated it as either something so sacred you could only have with somebody you married or
One person your whole life.
one person your whole life. But
Yeah.
monogamy is a perfectly valid but not the only way of living your life.
Sure.
And also, you don't have to have a serious relationship to have sex.
No.
It
Yeah.
could be something between friends. It could be something that's
Yeah.
just between strangers. As long as it's consenting and safe, then that's what
That's all
matters.
that matters. Yep. No, I love that. I thought it was, and it's just approached in such a way where the message is there, but it's approached in such a way that I think as a reader, you read it and go, yeah, that is fine. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
sometimes you read stuff and you feel like, ooh, like
Yeah,
I'm told that's not supposed to be, but when you read it and it like, you're like, yeah, for sure. Like it just, that's kind of how it read for me. There's a story in particular. I think it's the one we were just talking about, maybe The Gift, where that's more brought into
that's very yeah.
yeah,
That's a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think that, but no, that was just something I wanted to comment on because I think that adds another layer to the conversation about sex positive conversations and stuff in horror, which I thought was handled really, really well.
Because again, so much of horror is about punishing people for having sex as well.
It is.
It is.
There's entire franchises built up.
Yes. I mean, why does Jason kill anyone? It's because they're having sex. That's what happens.
That's the only reason.
The only way you can be safe in that movie is if you're virgin.
If you can't, yeah, that's the only way you can survive. The only way to, yeah, no, for sure.
And of course they did that nice little twist in Cabin in the Woods on that whole thing. But
yes,
with the virgin and all that. But at the same time, again, it's this whole idea that either virginity is something that you have to cherish and pride yourself on, and that anybody who has sex is worthy of being murdered right away.
They're a heathen. Yeah, they're all these things. Yeah, no, I totally.
It's sort of reclaiming it in horror and taking that aspect of it away from horror. I think that because so much of horror is about punishing people for doing bad things, and but the bad things that they do are not necessarily bad things.
Actually, bad things, right?
Yeah, sure, kill people in horror who are like bad people. Yes, like do that. But
sure. Right.
Somebody smoking marijuana or somebody having sex.
That means they gotta go.
Not worthy of machetes and all. So.
It's true. No, it's true. One of the other things I noticed when I was reading through is that most of the there's a lot of perspectives that we get from different characters that are very they like we think they're like not really the protagonist, but there's a lot of perspectives on different characters where they're the villain, I guess, or I don't really not really villain, I guess, in some instances, but and those perspectives are super important to the entire story. And so I kind of wanted to ask, like where that kind of came from. If you're trying to tell us, are you in your villain era, Joshua Pangborn?
Well, now that you ask, I think that I owe a lot of that to May and the Book of Queer Saints, and sort of unlocking that side of me that realized it's okay for queer people to be bad, and it's
okay, sure.
Okay to write those people who are bad, and if the story is a queer story, some of the characters have to be bad in it. Otherwise, it's not really
bland. And no, that's true.
So I think for me, it's just sort of embracing all the facets, because just because you're a queer person doesn't make you a good person. And
sure.
And I mean, we all certainly know that. So we all certainly know that. We know plenty of people. But I think in media we're so tempted to use minorities as the perfect example of how to be a person, basically. And and that's just not how I want to. That's not the world that I live in. And that's not the world that the characters that I write live in, because the characters I write, they're all queer. So some of them have to be bad.
Yeah. No, I loved it. I think it adds it's such an interesting structural move for the stories, because they're so pivotal. Those perspectives really drive a lot of the main focal points of the story, but also, those endings we were talking about earlier, the twist endings and stuff like that.
And
well.
So many of the stories are first person, so sometimes you need another. You want to tell something to the audience that you can't convey in a first person perspective. So
no, sure.
That's sort of the other element there, I think, to sort of add that in a little bit. So
no, for sure. I didn't let me see. There was something Steve wanted me to specifically ask, so I want to make sure I hit that before I do my last two major things. Oh, he wanted me to let you know that he caught the Reefer Madness reference and he much appreciated it.
I thought he might.
And then the other thing,
Steve, but I'm glad that you caught it. So
the other thing he had here was, were there any true to life experience that informed his writing as an out gay man? I read it as written, so I think I said it right. Yeah.
Well, I've got a lot of deals with demons that I've made over the years. No, uh, you know, I mean, I think everything that I write always has some sort of element of my life in it in some way.
Sure.
Whether it's just a tiny little thing or sometimes an actual experience. There is I won't say, but there is a story in here that has an exact experience from my life in it. That I put into the story. So yes, there is. So yes, I would say yes, there is something that experience that is from my life in here. So
Well, now I'm like, which one is it? Now I'm like thinking, I'm like, oh God, is it the what's the is it the proposal?
it is the proposal. How did you know?
I was like, uh-oh.
It was a really lovely year that I had in the proposal. So
That's great though. I mean, I think in general, I don't I'm still kind of new to the concept of even considering myself a writer. I don't know if that's ever going to go away, but I ended up, one of my things that pushed me to write my collection, and it's not about me, so I'm gonna keep this super short, but I wrote a story about two women that were together and these kind of hardships that they faced as two women, and one of them was a trans woman, and my partner's trans. That was my sensitivity reader. But unfortunately, because I based the characters off of us, it became so personal
mm,
that when it got rejected, I was devastated because I
mm,
had put so much of my own life experiences into it. And I didn't even mean to. It was a total subconscious thing. But I ended up writing about, how, like by erasure and like all of these. And it just came out so naturally. But so when it got rejected, it was a big hit. But like it really, it hurt her, like wrecked my
mm.
month, kind of hurt. Which for anybody wondering is totally fine. It's absolutely reasonable to be upset. Just don't be a jerk about it to the person who rejected the story. You're
Exactly.
you're allowed to be upset. It's hard. And I get that. So don't ever let anybody tell you you're not allowed to be upset about rejections. It doesn't matter that they're not personal, they feel personal. But I think we naturally put in something of ourselves, right, into these stories. So I think that's a good question specifically, though, given the way that you tell your stories and your focal point, or I mean your focal characters and that. So that's a good question. Good job,
But
Steve, even though you're not here.
I think to further what Steve is asking specifically, I have worked very hard to create my life as an
Mhm,
out queer person, and
mhm,
as a person who's not ashamed of being fat,
mhm.
and as a person who is not ashamed of being openly queer. Um, and it's taken a long time for me to make the life that I wanted to live and
Yeah.
feel comfortable in it. So I think, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning. I think I write the worlds that I want to live in because I worked so hard to make the life that I have, the life
Yeah.
that I want. And so, yes, I think very much my stories are influenced by being an out queer person, because
Yeah.
it's uh, it's why I'm not scared anymore to make all of them characters queer. And it's why 10 years ago when I was writing the first season of Skeleton Crew, I still was, and it took me a while to. It took me 10 years, I guess, to get to this point where I'm at.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite 10 years, but it took me a while to get
A
here.
while.
To,
Yeah.
to the point where I can write something and say everybody in this is queer, and I don't care if you like it or not. I mean, I do care. I really want you to like it, but please like it. But at the same time, and you're right. I mean, rejections hurt. They do, but and
Yeah.
you can feel that. But at the same time, I'd rather be rejected for something that made you uncomfortable or made you not
Oh,
feel connected with
sure.
it because it was my voice, as opposed to being rejected because it didn't leave an impression on you. So.
Sure.
I
No, that's
mean,
true.
I think you and I have talked about the response that Crumbs had to a lot of the readers that from the Book of Queer Saints.
We did talk about that.
Crumbs was a very polarizing story, apparently, and I'm glad actually. As much as some of those comments can really hurt when I read them,
Mhm.
uh, I was also like, well, at least they didn't make it something. At least it wasn't a forgettable story for them. So
sure. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah, because Crumbs is in this. It was initially in Queer Saints Volume
yeah,
1. Um and then The Court of King Dong is also in this, which
yes.
it was initially in That Old House, the Bathroom. But um yeah, I really the only other thing I really and you probably essentially have already answered this, but what is something you hope people get out of reading this collection? Is there anything in particular that you're hoping somebody somewhere will get out of reading Homophobias?
Yes, I want them to get the desire to give me money to make movie versions of the scripts. Um, no, well, also that's serious. If anybody wants to help me fund any of these movies, please help me with that. But that's a really good question. I want people to I want people to get whatever I want them to get from everything else I write too. To know that it's
Mm,
okay to be who they are and to see themselves on the
yeah.
page. And I know that there's a lot of people who are fat and a lot of people who are queer who do not see fat
Yeah.
queer characters in the stories that they read. And if they do, they're fat queer characters who are in the background, or they're not having sex, they're not falling in love, they're just there.
Yeah.
And I want them to see themselves on the page and feel seen and feel the chance to imagine themselves in those roles. Because I know when growing up, I mean, when you're reading stories, part of the fun is imagining which character you'd be if you were, well, for me, it was
Yeah. No, for sure.
be in it, or picturing yourself in that story and being like, oh, this is me in that story. I want them to have characters that can actually physically feel comfortable picturing themselves as, and not feeling like, oh, if I lost 30 pounds, I could be this person, or if only I were a little straighter, I could be this person, or. But they don't have to do that with this collection, because there are. I mean, I don't know if you'd want to imagine yourself as some of these characters, but at least
Not
you've.
me personally, but
And also, I want people to feel. I want people to have a chance to read something that is going to make them uh, have those thoughts about consent and sexuality and love and all the things that we talked about. The themes of the stories are. I want them to have all those things and have an. Ultimately, though, I think I want them to all just walk away having a strong reaction. That's one way or
yeah.
another. One way or another, I want you, if you to read this collection, I want you to have a strong reaction to the stories and not just sort of meh.
No, I don't think that's gonna happen. These stories get crazy. Like I don't like it'll be really exciting to see, as someone who's already read it, kind of, when people start picking it up and talking about it. And um like it'll be really interesting to see, because of all of the different angles that these stories take, what resonates with who. Because I definitely did not go into this expecting to have a story that felt so relatable that I was like really bothered for days on end. Like, and so and I'm sure that even if not that story, even if it's another story, there's going to be things in this that really just hit people in ways that they're not going to go in prepared for. And I mean that in like the best way. Like,
No,
because
I hope you're right. I
yeah,
very much hope that's the case. I
yeah,
think that there's things that people will just not be expecting at all, and
yeah.
or they'll think that they know what's happening, and then they will just be completely caught off guard once they've solved the story, if you will. So
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I genuinely, and I know, like, I feel like I have to say this because here's the thing. Like, everybody has their weird thoughts on like being positive about books, and oh, if you only give 5-star reviews and I don't trust your reviews or whatever. Here's the thing. I know we have people on, I consider you a friend. We've done other content together and stuff before, but I really, aside from all of that, I became a friend and a fan because I read your work unsolicited. I read it on a random occurrence. I picked a story out of a book, and it was like that was like a zing moment of like, I got to go follow this author and I got to keep up with what's going on, because it was unlike anything I had read before. And I talked about this because our conversations and what you have written has inspired me to rewrite the way that I describe characters too, because I have a protagonist in a book that I need people to know she's what we consider plus size. She's got some oomph, and I needed people to know that. That was super important. I don't think that's something I would have ever done without reading your stuff and talking to
Oh,
you.
that's huge. That means so much to me. I mean, that's
It's
what I want is people to find their voices because
yeah,
and be another contributor to the world of fat positivity and fat
yeah.
and making it okay. I'm so thank you for sharing that because that means a lot.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say it later because I'm trying to like I don't want to talk about my stuff while but I just did want to mention that because that was something that I would have never bothered to try to put, but it became important to me because I realized that through reading stuff like what you write. And then also there's a YA author. I can never remember her name. Or I can never remember their name, but they write there's a series they have. It's why it's called Honey Bloods. But the cover of all three books in the trilogy, it's about it's sapphic, and there's the vampire girlfriend is like super thick. She's so cute on the front, and all of her, like, she wears like she's and very clearly comfortable in her skin, like wearing like things that they always say certain people shouldn't wear and all these kind of things. And so I saw those, and the way that it made me feel was just like, yeah, we need more of that. Like there just isn't enough of it. And then I couldn't get through. I got an early reader for a book, and I couldn't get through it because every time the author talked about a female character that wasn't the main character's wife, he talked about how fat she was.
Mm.
It's such a clearly negative, like it ended up being a DNF for me. I couldn't finish it. I was like, I can't, this is, but these are things that like, I got so used to that stuff, right? That
Mm.
a year ago, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have even noticed that. I would have just suffered through and just read it and wouldn't have even known why it bothered me. But anyway, my point in saying that is it stirs up things when you start being able to see yourself in media and read about people that look like real people and not just anyway. So I just wanted to say all of that.
No, 100%. I think it's such if I don't do anything else, it's stuff like that that I want to do.
Yeah.
Even if I don't make it or whatever that is, whatever the making
Who
is.
knows?
But if I can get people who do read what I write or watch what I make for film and television, to think that way and see themselves, that's such such a beautiful thing to have happen. And
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I know I've been successful with that with film and television because I've
Yeah.
had people reach out to me about that.
Mhm.
And I'm so glad that this is something that you also connected with in
No.
writing. The more
Yeah.
people who do it, the more people who will read it, and the more people who will read that will do it themselves, and that is how
It'll
we
just
make
become
change.
this movement of
Yes,
Pangborn. What did you say? Or Pangbornness? What did you say
Pangbornian,
earlier?
Pangbornian. It's a Pangbornianism.
That's it. I love it. I love it so much. That's perfect. Coined. Um, oh, you know what? The one thing we didn't talk about, we should probably talk about the release date for this.
Oh, I guess that would help a
We got
little.
so wrapped up in all of the other stuff. I totally didn't. I spaced it. So this comes out when? What's the release date for this?
Well, the ebook is currently available for pre-order right now on
Perfect.
Amazon. And if you want a physical copy, then you can wait until September 13th, aka Friday the 13th.
Love
And
that.
you'll be able to get a collection on Friday the 13th on Amazon as
Perfect.
well. So
Well, that's a good day to do it. Yeah.
I had
Perfect.
to. Well, Defeer picked the date again because he had to. He said, this is the great day. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Let's do that.
Did you tell
So
him that super smart marketing?
he's very good at what he does with marketing. So I'm going to try
Yeah.
to rely on him for a lot of other marketing things in the future. So.
Yeah, for sure. Take advantage. Use it. Well, cool. Was there anything else you wanted to share about the book that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet? Or
Um, I think you've asked some wonderful questions that will hopefully pique people's interest and make them want to
oh,
read it.
well,
So
thank you.
um, I think that just for your own edification, I think the oldest story in the collection that I wrote many years ago, in a different iteration, but in the way that the oldest story is Empty Nest. So that is probably the first thing. I didn't write it with the idea of this being in this collection, but the story as it is now in the collection was written for this. But the main part of it, the second half of the story basically was part of something I wrote many years ago that I took and repurposed and added to this. So I thought you might enjoy knowing that that is
That's cool. Yeah, that's super fun to think about. Yeah, because that was the one that hit the hardest. It's my favorite.
That's probably from 2007 or 8, actually.
Wow. And now it's going to be out in the world.
I know. I am so psyched for people to read it. And
Me too.
I think something fun for people to know is that one of the reasons all of these stories are potential feature films or short films that I'm planning to make someday. So you can read the stories first and then watch the movies after they come out. So
that's exciting. Yeah.
But other than that, I'm just really excited. I'm so grateful to Dafir, and again, I can't sing his praises enough. Thank you so much to Dafir for coming on and helping me with this and guiding me through this and putting up with my questions and my concerns and my neuroses about the book not being long enough.
Right.
I'm like, it's not even going to be 50 pages. It's longer than 50. It's 170, I think, or something like that.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it ended up being longer than I thought it was going to be, so that's good. I'm very happy about that. So, but yeah, no, I'm really excited for people to read it. So please pick up a copy, and if you read it, it is on Goodreads. You can respond to it on Goodreads, and if you also, even if you didn't like it, I'd love to see what you thought about it because again, it's really, really rewarding to know that something you write has created some sort of feeling in somebody, whether it's good or bad. And again, sometimes those bad feelings are really hard to read, but it's still, I'd still rather create some sort of a response from you emotionally than a toast response where it's like, eh. So.
Yeah. No, yeah. I do recommend it. I'll have the links to where you can find Joshua in general, but also specifically where you can order a copy of Homo Phobias for yourself. Yeah. Well, thank you for making time to chat about this. I was really excited to finally get a chance. I know we had to reschedule a couple of times because life is insane, but
life works. But I am so grateful to be here and talk about this, and I really, really, really appreciate you reading it first of all, and then second of all, giving a blurb, and then third of all, having me on the show to talk about it. So
of course, yeah, you're welcome here anytime, Joshua. Seriously, it's always a pleasure. It's always a great conversation, and I'm very excited for you to have this out and to get to see people's reactions to it. I'm really looking forward to that. So cool. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Once again, please go check out Homo Phobias. The links where you can find Joshua and the book will be in the description for this episode. Please go check it out. Highly, highly, highly recommend, especially if you're looking for something different, because I think this is going to check so many different boxes. But all right. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We hope you have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you in the next one.